in.
Excellent. So my name is Alicia Castaneda. I'm here to talk about emotional eating because I was an expert in this. And I managed somehow, to stop. What I want to share with people is this process of replicating that journey of being able to go from emotional eating to having a healthy relationship with food, feeling in control. And so that's what this workshop, Freedom from Emotional Eating, is all about. And while everyone's journey will, of course, look a little bit different, this is something that can be taught. And that's probably the most important thing that I want people to know, is that if you are feeling out of control with food, and if you are worried about your food relationship and worried like, wow, I've been doing this for so long, I can't even imagine feeling normal around food anymore, that it absolutely is possible. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I do have some stuff for everyone to look at. And you can hear my dog scratching at the door. Alrighty. So first things first is, what are y'all in for? We are going to talk about how to develop healthy coping methods for processing emotions, which, if you are worried about emotional eating, and eating is the primary way that you are processing or not processing, avoiding processing your emotions, we're going to talk about how you can actually focus on processing the emotions in a healthy way, so that you can do things like curbing these overeating episodes, because emotional eating is very often not done when you're hungry. I mean, you can do it when you're hungry, but most of the time we're doing it because we're not hungry. We're doing it to solve a different problem. And that means that if you are working with, if you're working with a coach, if you're working to lose weight and you have better consistency in your diet, you're going to get better results from that. Oftentimes, emotional eating is something that we do in secret. We try to hide it from other people because it brings up a lot of shame. So this is going to help you to stop being able to sneak food or eating food in secret. For a lot of us, especially for parents, but all of us in general, we want to live a healthy relationship with food. And for some, it's important for us to model a healthy relationship with food that we can feel really proud of. Again, whether it's just for ourselves or whether it's for ourselves and our family or whoever else is around us. And perhaps most importantly, to feel a sense of peace with food, to be able to eat a balanced diet, a healthy selection of foods, that you can feel like you're really enjoying what you eat and that you're not totally restricted or deprived of anything, and not feeling like you're losing control around certain foods or around certain times, that this is just a sense of peace that you have, that you can eat the foods that you enjoy and not feel out of control with them. And we can do that even if you've been emotionally eating for a long time. For me, I was probably doing it for over a decade. For some of us, it's been multiple decades before we learn how to stop. Even if your relationship with food does feel out of control, or if you've tried to solve emotional eating before, and even if you're embarrassed about sharing this with other people, when I had first started working with a coach and it was still happening for me, I was really embarrassed to talk about it. I didn't want to tell my coach, no, I'm going off track, because I can't control myself when I feel certain emotions and I just dive into the kitchen anyway. And I know that you told me what to eat, but I'm not listening, and I can't, there's nothing I can do about it. So I didn't want to talk about it for a long time because I felt really embarrassed about it. But I want to also show people why it makes a lot of sense, which probably sounds pretty backwards right now, but why it makes a lot of sense and why it's not shameful at all. So by the end of this, we're going to learn why it occurs, again, why it's nothing to feel ashamed of, the 3 layers of emotional eating, and which one you probably know, but the two that you're probably ignoring, and what the next steps that you need to take are to begin addressing emotional eating. So this is me. This is just my short bio. I have had struggled in the past with not just emotional eating, but full-blown eating disorder, anxiety, depression, and all the kind of lovely side effects that go along with it, like being in toxic relationships, really struggling with financial problems. And this is all stuff that I learned how to take control of and to resolve through the power of my mindset. So now when I discovered that, and I realized that I wasn't just a victim to my brain chemistry or my circumstances, or, this is how my childhood was. And so now I'm going to be a total mess of an adult, and that's not my fault, but like, gosh, my life just sucks. That I realized when I did have this much control, that it was something that can be repeated, that I wasn't special. I wasn't special for finding myself in a mess, and I wasn't special for figuring out how to get out of it, that this is something that we can all learn. So I've been speaking a lot about it ever since then, teaching, coaching, writing. I have also, again, just been working with a lot of people to show them how much more control we have than we think we do. And then just for funsies, I was a professional violinist in my past life and a competitive bodybuilder. So those are my humble brags. First things first, what is emotional eating? Emotional eating is the act of soothing our uncomfortable emotions using food. And we're using that food to change our emotional state, to go from uncomfortable to comfortable. And like I said, this is regardless of your physical state of hunger. Sometimes, you might emotional eat when you are feeling hungry, but oftentimes we don't. It doesn't have anything to do with food. And that all sounds pretty innocent, right? But what happens when we do it is we're filled with guilt. We're filled with shame. We're filled with regret. And I want you to tell me if this sounds familiar. I can't believe I did this again. Why can't I get myself to stop? What is wrong with me? I have no self-control. I'm so disgusting. Why am I so weak? I have no willpower. I'll never be able to stop. I'm going to be fat forever. I'm such a failure. What is wrong with me? My coach is going to be so disappointed. I can't stand myself. I feel disgusting. What is wrong with me? And again, there's all of this guilt, there's all of this shame, there's all of this regret. And we know that emotional eating is not good for us. We don't want to do it. And we know that we shouldn't. So why does this happen anyway? It happens because it works. And I want to talk about shame for a second. And I want to talk about shame for more than a second, because it's a really important emotion for us to talk about in conversation. I'm an expert at recognizing shame because I was an expert at feeling it, because I would induce this on myself all the time. So why don't I shame my mindset students for emotional eating? Well, because there's nothing shameful about it. Thinking that there is, or thinking that there's something wrong with you for emotional eating, is only going to keep that cycle going. So one of the first things that I teach my students who come to work with me on their relationships with food is why it makes sense to emotional eat. And that's the part that is pretty confusing for a lot of people. Like, wait a second, this makes sense. You're not broken. You're not weak. You're not lacking in discipline. That is one of the huge myths about our relationships with food, is that we just need to have more willpower, and that if we can't control ourselves around food, it just means that we don't have enough self-discipline. Emotional eating and its cousin binge eating, they're very natural, self-soothing responses to difficult emotions. Oops. As humans, one of our primary goals is to get from being is to change our emotional state such that anytime that we're uncomfortable, that we're in a state of discomfort, we're going to do whatever we need to do to get ourselves to a state of comfort. That is something that we do whether we are cold and we're putting on a sweater, whether we are thirsty and we're getting a drink of water, we're hungry, so we're getting food. We're in an uncomfortable emotional state. And so food becomes something that we use to change that emotional state. So just like we are trying to get rid of our physical discomfort, we're also trying to get rid of our emotional discomfort. This is pretty much what we're designed to do, avoiding discomfort, seeking comfort. And some emotions, as we all know, are pretty uncomfortable, but food is extremely pleasurable. And that's why it works so well. That's why emotional eating is actually such a common, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I'm the only one that I know that does it, you are definitely not alone. This is something that is way more common than we often believe. And just to give you a little taste of that in having worked with now somewhere around 400 men and women on fitness, nutrition, and mindset, that somewhere in the realm of 90 to 95% of them, so a pretty decent slice of the population, all different ages, split genders, people with all different backgrounds all over the country, and 90 to 95% of them were emotional eating. So very, very common. Nowadays, we have really easy access to food that has been engineered to taste as good as possible, to release as many feel-good chemicals as possible. So once upon a time, you ate some food when you were feeling bad, and your brain registered that you felt better. So we're not usually emotional eating. We're not really grabbing for like the raw carrot sticks or a piece of fruit. We're usually going for crunchy, salty, snacky things or sweets, because they will release as even more of these chemicals as possible. So when again, the first time that an instance of emotional eating happened for you, when you were feeling bad, you reached for food, your brain registered that you felt better. And that was when this new habit was born. That was the first time when your brain said, that worked really well. Let's try that again. And the more that you did it, the more it became ingrained as a habit. So the reason that the habit of emotional eating is so difficult to break is because your brain knows that it works. And since the day that habit was born, you've repeated it again and again. The more that you repeat it, the more you've strengthened that particular response. The easier it gets to choose that response again and again. So again, I just want to reiterate that this doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It actually means that there's nothing wrong with you, and your brain and your body are functioning exactly as they should. They're picking up on this information. To go from uncomfortable to comfortable, I'm going to use food because it works. It gets me out of this uncomfortable state as quick as possible. So all this means is that you need to practice a new response and to learn new coping methods for working with difficult emotions. This is how we know that change is absolutely possible. So we're going to talk about this habit loop that you see a little bit later when we get to the different layers of emotional eating. So The layers I have kind of put together, the 3 layers of emotional eating I put together, and I called them the Jawbreaker Model. So why is this called the Jawbreaker Model? For one, we're talking about emotional eating and it's candy. And for 2, most people start from the outside of a jawbreaker, and then as you get deeper, you reveal more color. And then 3, if you're impatient and you lack a healthy fear of chipping your teeth, you can just bite down and get straight to the core. So these are the 3 layers. We have the outer layer, which is the behavioral layer, the middle layer, which is the emotional layer, and the core, which is the cognitive layer. So you don't have to memorize any of these. We're going to go through them each one by one so that we can talk about how each one contributes to emotional eating, and then how these can contribute to changing that habit, to healing from emotional eating. So in the first layer, in the behavioral layer, we want to look at how when you're flooded with frustration or disappointment or overwhelm or anxiety or whatever other negative emotion is coming up for you, you begin seeking comfort. And you're not really going to feel motivated to do something that takes a lot of work to change that emotional state, like reaching out and talking to someone about it, or going for a bout of exercise, or even going for a walk. And so that's why, even though when I was going through this process myself and I understood how habits are formed and broken, that I would still find myself going and raiding the pantry and scarfing down these copious amounts of food to feel better when I felt bad, and even to the point of extreme discomfort. So eating to the point where, eating to change my emotional state to the point where it put me in great physical discomfort. So diving into the world of mindset and emotional control, I learned more productive ways of both experiencing and diffusing my emotions. But before we talk about those emotions, we're going to stay in the behavioral layer. We're going to talk about habits a little bit more. So this is the habit loop. This is how we develop habits. So we have a cue. In the case of emotional eating, our cue is whatever emotion comes up. Again, overwhelm, frustration, anxiety, whatever it is. And you can let me know in the comments, what is an emotion that comes up commonly for you? What is something that, if you think back and remember what triggers your emotional eating, what emotion do you think is coming up commonly for you that is producing, number 2, that craving to eat? So after we have the craving, then we have the response, which is eating, emotional eating. And then we get a pretty immediate reward, which is relief. Ooh, I don't feel that uncomfortable emotion anymore. I feel better. So in the book, The Power of Habit, and in pretty much any book about habits that you read, whether it's, I was kind of a junkie for these types of self-help books. So I've read The Power of Habit, Making Habits, Breaking Habits, Good Habits, Bad Habits, Atomic Habits, you name it. But we learn that we can change our habits if we just substitute the response or the routine. So on the left here, if you're looking at the slides, you'll see that we have the original habit loop. And then if we change the response, we get a new habit loop where we still have the cue, which is the uncomfortable emotion. We still have the craving, so we get a craving to eat, but then our response to that craving is to say, do some exercise. Or maybe instead of doing exercise, maybe you would say, go make a cup of tea, or text your coach, or talk to a friend, go for a walk, whatever it is. So you have a different response, and then you still get what you're looking for, which is the relief. So whatever response, so it has to be a response that provides you with the same relief. Applied to So yeah, applied to emotional eating, this is how you're supposed to be able to break or replace this habit. So what this means is that you train yourself into emotional eating and you can train yourself out of it. However, big problem with this. This is very simplistic and it often does not work in practice. It did not work for me. And much to my disappointment as sort of a newer coach, it didn't work with my nutrition clients that I shared this model with either. With the best of intentions to alter this habit, when you're flooded with a negative emotion, it feels next to impossible to just choose something other than eating. So if you're an emotional eater, you probably have already tried this before, where maybe you decided, okay, if I have a craving, I just need to pick something else. I just need to go do something else. I need to distract myself for long enough. I need to, or the thing that was suggested to me a lot when I was working with a coach, when I was a client, was have a cup of tea, go for a walk. And I knew this. And in the moment, I would say to myself, I don't want to emotional eat. I don't want to do this to myself again. I don't want to screw up. But then in the heat of the moment, it felt like all of that just went out the window. And I would feel like I lost control. So then if this isn't working, this whole model of like, just do something else, if this is not working, we have to go deeper. We have to look at the emotions. So this brings us to the emotional layer, the second layer. And you might think that the emotional layer of emotional eating would be the core, but it's not. So addressing the emotional layer is essential because when you take away the coping mechanism, which is food, you're still left with that discomfort. And then without a way to get rid of that discomfort, sitting with painful emotions can honestly feel excruciating. And you probably know what I'm talking about, that it can just feel like if I don't get rid of this craving, it's going to be here forever. And it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And I'm so uncomfortable right now. And to be honest with you, learning how to process and cope with difficult emotions was absolutely more helpful than being told to just have a cup of tea or go for a walk. But it's still not enough, because my ideal version of emotional health isn't just battling cravings all day, like knowing how to battle cravings and going through those battles. So what we're going to get into next is preventing those negative emotions from arising in the first place. So in the emotional layer, one of the major tools that we use is mindfulness. And mindfulness includes things like stopping, pausing. We have this acronym STOP to remind us. Stop, take a breath, observe what's happening, and then proceed. So when I say observe, we're not just observing, oh my God, I have this craving that is going to drive me up the wall, but we're observing, what am I feeling right now? What are the emotions that are coming up for me? What am I thinking? Who's around me? What are these triggers for me to feel this way? Did you just get into a fight with one of your kids? Did you just get off a long day at work? Did you, are you laying in bed in front of the TV or like laying on the couch and you're just relaxing and you get then you get a craving. So asking yourself, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? What is this environment that is triggering me to overeat? Feeling your feelings, learning how to sit with your emotions. A lot of us think that we feel our feelings, but I'm going to tell you that you don't. That often, instead of feeling our feelings, we're suppressing them. I don't want to feel that right now. I just need to get rid of it. Or we're smothering them with food, or we're smothering them with drinking or shopping or social media. Procrastination is another form of emotional avoidance. It's very similar to emotional eating. And so we're, rather than smothering or suppressing our feelings, something that you can actually work on and practice is sitting with different emotions and realizing that as all this stuff comes up for me, what's happening? Well, maybe I am feeling tightness in my chest, or I've got a knot in my stomach, or my face is feeling flushed, or I'm just feeling really antsy and agitated. Well, are you capable of withstanding those patterns? Because that's all an emotion is. Urge surfing is similar to sitting with emotions, but it is the practice of just recognizing that your cravings are like waves. And if you have a craving and you don't give into it, where you just let it be and you just observe it, that it's going to actually get worse. It's going to start to crest. It's going to feel like, oh my God, if I don't get rid of this, it's going to be here forever. And I'm going to be so uncomfortable. It feels like it's just going to last forever. But you'll notice if you practice urge surfing, that it crests up like a wave, and then it eventually just tapers off on its own. This whole practice, so I could do a separate workshop on this, but this whole practice only takes about 15 or 20 minutes. But most of us just can't wait that long. We give into the craving before that. But if we learn we learn and practice how to just observe and ride that wave, it will just wash out on its own. So let's talk about preventing negative emotions from arising in the first place. To do that, we have to talk about the core, the cognitive layer. It makes sense that these three layers present themselves in this order because your thoughts or your cognitions create your feelings or emotions, which then in turn motivate your actions or behaviors. So we kind of touched on this a little bit before, where I said all of our actions are to get us from a place of discomfort to a place of comfort, or even from a place of neutrality to a place of greater comfort or pleasure. And this is from anything really, really small where, oh, I have to pee, so I'm going to go do that, or to something really large where I want to have financial success, so I'm going to do XYZ work. I don't want to feel lonely, so I'm going to seek out a relationship. So everything from the really, really small things that we do in our lives to the things that will have a much greater impact on us, the kind of big pillars of our lives, everything is motivated by wanting to feel good. Now, that part is probably pretty easy to understand. The next part, which is that our thoughts create and influence our emotions, isn't usually so well known. So I'm going to let you in on a big secret here. I mean, that's the secret. So I want to kind of explain how this works, because a lot of people are like, I don't know if I really believe you. So I have two examples for you. These are my two favorites. One is that, so a lot of people will say, that made me upset. That made me angry, or even he made me, like another person, he made me angry, she made me sad, whatever. So we're putting the blame on our outside circumstances or outside people and saying, this made me feel a certain way. And I want to prove to you why that is not true and how you create your own emotions. So example one, there's a guy sitting in his car in a traffic jam on his way home from work. He's got classic road rage. So he is turning beet red. He's gripping the steering wheel. He's honking his horn. He's yelling out the window. He's flipping people off. And he's thinking things like, who are all these idiots on the road? What the hell is happening? I just want to get out of here. I'm going to be late for meeting up with my friends. And all he can think about is how much this is inconveniencing him. This is not fair. Everybody else is a terrible driver. And why is he stuck here? And he might be thinking to himself, this traffic jam is making me so effing angry. But how do we know that it's not? Because there's a guy in the car next to him that is sitting there perfectly calm. He's in the same exact traffic jam, but he's thinking, and he's on his way home from work, but he's thinking, oh, okay, so I'm probably going to be here for about 20 or 30 minutes extra. I just got this new audiobook that I can't wait to get started. I'm going to get to listen to this. I have some stuff that I'm supposed to do at home that now I don't have to do right away. So he's actually thinking like, this is giving me some time back to myself to just chill out. And he's like, hey, this is a little bit of, all right, this is all right. Maybe, you know, some people might go so far as to say like, oh, this is a little bit of like a gift of time. So not everybody really loves sitting in traffic, but maybe he's gotten himself to the point of thinking, this is a neutral event. This is okay. I don't want to be sitting in traffic, but as long as I have to be, I'm going to listen to my new book. I'm going to chill out. I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that stuff at home till I get there, and cool. So if we're having two very different emotional responses to the same outside circumstances, it couldn't be those circumstances that's causing it. It's because of what they're thinking about the circumstances that are creating it. So the second example that I have for you is if someone came to me and they said, oh my God, you look so good today. You might think, wow, that compliment would make me feel really good. And it might. So if I were thinking to myself like, oh my gosh, yeah, I spent a little bit of extra time on my makeup today. I'm really feeling myself. This person noticed. That's so sweet. I'm going to accept that as a compliment. I'm going to feel good. However, the person could say the exact same thing. Oh my God, you look so good today. And I could be thinking like, oh, I have like a fresh pimple and I messed up my eyeliner and my hair is a mess. Like I have to get it cut. And like, this person's full of crap. I don't know what they're talking about. That's actually kind of insulting because now it just feels like they're blowing smoke up my ass. So it's the exact same thing coming from the exact same person, but I'm either interpreting it as a compliment or even like borderline insult. Like I'm either not accepting it as a compliment or I'm turning around and thinking like this person's being dishonest with me. So that all comes down to how we're thinking. So let's get a little bit deeper into the core, into the cognitive layer. This is really the heart of the mindset work that I do, because when you have a deep understanding and practice of how your thoughts impact your feelings, you can minimize the intensity and the frequency of negative emotions. Where if you're that guy or girl in the traffic jam that tends to have road rage in general, you can actually change your patterns of thought such that you can feel calmer, or so that you can develop a greater sense of self-worth so that you can actually accept more compliments. Or I could give you 1,000 other examples, a million other examples of how this could work to help you to, again, minimize negative emotions and to feel greater positive emotions. So of this list that you see here, workability, the choice model, thought examination, creating your feelings, believing differently, these are all just different mindset tools that I use in my coaching, in food body self-coaching, to help people to really work with their thoughts, to learn how to work with their thoughts. So I want to dive into one of those, which is the most important, which is a thought examination. So what you'll see here, evidence and alternatives, is the way that we think follows patterns. So we fall into habits of thinking just like we fall into behavioral habits. And so if you are someone that feels frustrated often or overwhelmed often, you're probably going to continue feeling that way in the future. And it's not necessarily because of what's happening in your life. It's because of how you're thinking about it. So I if you don't believe me, I can introduce you to several students that I work with, or even several of the coaches that are on my team who will tell you, nothing in my life changed. My kids are still a pain in the ass. My husband doesn't always help out when I ask him to. My wife or my partner or whoever still has their same quirks. I was trying to think of an endearing way to say that. But the way that we think about them can be different. The way that we think about ourselves, our own identity, our own capability for handling things can change as well. So in a thought examination, when we're thinking about something that happened in the past, like for example, I got passed over for a promotion. So when you explain to yourself why that happened, two examples could be, I got passed over for the promotion because I'm not good enough and my boss doesn't value my work. Or you might say to yourself, I got passed over for the promotion because there's someone that was more qualified than me. So those are two very different examples, and you might not know why you were passed over. You might have a conversation and ask, but you might be thinking to yourself, oh my God, I'm not valued, I'm not appreciated, I don't do good work, and I suck, and I shouldn't even be doing this, I don't deserve to be doing this. Or you might be thinking, I do incredible work, I know that work is valued, but someone else was a better fit for this. And that's actually going to change how you act moving forward. The last three on this page for doing a thought examination. So just like we think about things that have happened in the past, like being passed over for a promotion, we think about things that happen in the future. This is how we create anxiety. So anxiety is an extended state of fear where we're thinking about something that's going to happen in the future that we either don't want to happen or we think we're incapable of handling. So we think about how we are, so we start catastrophizing and thinking about the worst case scenario, the worst thing that can happen. And we can actually consider, well, if the worst case scenario were to happen, how likely would it be? It's probably a lot less likely than you think it is. Or you could even go there. I encourage my mindset students to go there. If the worst case scenario happened, what would you do? Would you actually be capable of handling it? And then we also look at our self-talk. Are we in a constant state of self-criticism? Are we thinking about all of the things that we didn't do, the things we need to fix, the things that we need to change? Or are we thinking about what we appreciate? Are we thinking about the things that we did accomplish, the things that we got done that day? How are we talking to ourselves? Are we criticizing ourselves, or are we sending ourselves a message of kindness, of appreciation? So in the cognitive layer, we also address your life in a more holistic way. And I know that word has a lot of meaning has changed over time, but by holistic, I just mean we're looking at it, we're looking at as many angles as possible. So we're looking at the big picture. We're looking at your life in a whole. Are there any actions that you can take to reduce your emotional triggers, like setting stronger boundaries, asking for help, changing your circumstances? And that those in turn will also help your emotional eating by reducing the frequency of your cravings. And another important part of the cognitive layer of the core is addressing your thoughts around food, because if food's primary purpose is to help make you feel good when you feel bad, it's going to be much more difficult to change your behavior around it than if you drain the emotional charge and use food as a way to take care of yourself. So I like for everyone that I work with that's working on their food relationship to come up with a food philosophy. How do I want to use food in my life? Because a lot of people will say, I don't want food to have any emotional attachment. I just want food to be totally neutral. And what they usually mean by that is, I want to feel in control of food. I don't want to be emotional eating anymore or binging. However, I mean, think about it this way. If your best friend has something incredible happen to them, they get married, they get the promotion they've always wanted, something big, and they say, we're going out for dinner. Do you want to come? Do you want to sit there and just say like, this food is totally just fuel? Or do you want to say like, oh, that would be amazing. Let's have a celebratory dinner. We can use food, and it's perfectly acceptable to use food for bonding, for celebration. And again, this emotional attachment does not have to be out of control. We can learn how to do this in a very deliberate way, and to use food in ways that feel good to us. The other thing that's related to that is also, or two things I should say, is your mental satiety and your food, and having a food abundance mindset. So just like we talk about physical satiety, is your food satisfying to you? Is it keeping you full? I like to talk about mental satiety. Is the food that you're eating mentally satisfying to you? Or do you feel like when you get to the end of your plate, I still want something more? Getting to the end of a meal and saying, I want to go grab something else because I really didn't like that. This happens a lot, actually, with a lot of typical diet foods, where you'll get to the bottom of like a container of that low calorie ice cream, like Halo Top or something, and you'll go like, I still want the ice cream. That was kind of gross. Or so I see that happen a lot. And so we talk about, how different food choices impact our mental satiety. Having a food abundance mindset is the opposite of a scarcity mindset, which is feeling like there is not enough, there will never be enough. This happens very, very, very often with dieting because we are restricting our food. And so we feel that restriction physically and we feel it mentally. Having a food abundance mindset is incredibly important for dieting because, and just having a healthy relationship with food in general, because we want to feel like we're eating enough. What I'm eating is enough. And so this goes right hand in hand with mental satiety. But by using your thoughts to reduce your emotional triggers, to minimize the intensity and the frequency of negative emotions, and to improve your relationship with food, that's how you can address this most impactful layer of the Jawbreaker model, which is the cognitive layer. There is a reason that this is the core, because it just impacts out everything. Remember, your thoughts influence your emotions, which influence your behaviors. So I really believe that and that's me eating gelato in Amsterdam. I firmly believe that if I had not addressed all three of these layers, I don't think I would have ever fully healed my relationship with food. And the freedom that that's given me has just been such an indescribable relief. I don't have to rely on tracking my food daily, or at all anymore. I haven't done it in a couple of years, or to maintain a healthy weight. I don't have to worry that when I pull my summer shorts out from last year, whether they'll still fit or not. And I don't dive into the pantry anymore when I get upset. And really what I'm probably most grateful for is that I don't feel that rush of guilt and shame that always lasted like 100 times more than the pleasure of eating. So that's all I've got for you. That's the Jawbreaker model of emotional eating. Now what? I talk about this stuff every single day in my Facebook group, Food Body Self. So you're welcome to join me there. It's a free group, public group. It's open to everyone. I would love if you would come in there, talk about food with us. We talk about body image. We talk about self-worth. And we just do this every single day. This is what we do, but it's there for community. It's there for education. Or if you would like to read about this stuff, I send out a weekly newsletter once a week, which you can sign up for at ritualco.co/services. The Food Body Self Facebook community. We recently changed our name. And so if you're looking for us on Facebook, you can search for Food Body Self. But our URL is at facebook.com/groups/resilience roundtable, which is our old name. Yeah, I was going to say I can type that into the comments. However, I don't know where it'll show up. So I would say, look for the Food Body Self community. And then you can ask me questions. I am not sure who's here live, but I'm going to stop my screen. Rylan, should I stop my screen share?
Should you stop it?
Yeah, should I stop the screen share or should I leave it up for those links?
Yeah, I think you can stop it. I got a few questions here. I've had some people come in and out. No questions so far, but I think I can ask a few questions that kind of came to mind for myself. So really good. Love the presentation, and it's just kind of funny how all of your models and stuff like that is what I've really come to learn for myself in the last year. And I love how the Jawbreaker model, obviously the appreciation of it being a food model is really great. And but just to really like the ask why was like a pivotal thing for me. So I'm curious though, because and I work with my clients different, but there's going to be clients that have some form of emotional eating attached to them, not all of them, but quite a few of them. And so why not discipline to some extent? And this is just my question, because I'm not saying that all of these things aren't true that you're talking about, but when you're talking, and I'm just challenging it a little bit, because when you're talking about trying to create or trying to reestablish emotion and cognitive layers and all these things that are very embedded in nature, this is just where I'm just curious. Is it the language that you prefer to use so that people don't have guilt around not having discipline?
So I see it as any of the behaviors that we have adopted have made sense. So when we start emotional eating, it is generally because there are factors in our lives, and also the way that we're processing those. So talking about how our thoughts impact how we think about what happens to us, that all of this makes sense, and it's based on our previous training. So I have people that I've worked with who, without practicing any willpower or discipline, simply by changing their beliefs and how they're thinking about themselves and their capabilities, and how they're thinking about the events that happen in their lives, where their relationship with food has been completely transformed without feeling like or without changing their level of willpower at all. So in terms of thinking about how much we have and how much can be gained, so the idea of like how much we're born with versus how much we can attain through training, without even focusing on discipline or willpower at all, we're able to get a complete shift in how we're acting. So you did hit on something there as well, which was, is it just a language preference? I've noticed that a lot of people tend to beat themselves up for not having enough discipline or not having enough willpower. And so this contributes to that self-criticism, and self-criticism increases our negative emotions. So if we're beating ourselves up and saying, oh my God, I'm so weak, I have no discipline, I have no willpower, we're actually increasing our negative emotions, which then become a trigger for, and you've probably seen this type of self-sabotage when someone says, I messed up, I'm so bad, now I'm going to mess up for the rest of the weekend. Something like that, where it can become, oh, I feel bad about making a mistake or going off track, doing something I said I wouldn't. And that in itself becomes a trigger for overeating. So it's in part to avoid that.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. It's not to draw attention to you lack discipline. You certainly can't start there. I mean, most people with their diets, when it comes down to it, like I actually don't write meal plans. I get them to write their own, but it's really about, I'm not even gonna dare to tell you that you're doing it wrong until you have enough of the right stuff in before you pull anything out. Like you cannot, I can't tell you a certain amount if the stuff isn't even the right stuff. So, you know, it's basically you're looking at the behavior, the emotional model first, rather than even discussing whether they have discipline. So I guess, you know, to me, it's like you say, it cleans up most of it. And that's kind of what I find with my approach with the food types. And so one of the things that I was curious about, because you had said how when you go into the deep layers and stuff, that has more to do with the cognition. And I'll speak very openly this about me. What about emotional connections to food, to a food type? You know, how do you help people with that? Like, I'll give a really good. This isn't so much me. I love cookies, but so I don't keep them around, right? And I think what I would love to heal that relationship, to be able to have them around and be able to have them once a week. But I don't have that relationship with that food, so I have to acknowledge that. So I only occasionally have it around. Now, another really prime example I've seen quite a few times with bread. I find people have shockingly an emotional connection to bread, where they'll just, as soon as someone said, oh, I just love it, I was like, whoa, like that's a pretty potent thing. And then, you know, whether it's whole bread or white bread, you know, either way, you are still talking about a processed food. So how do you manage with people talking about food in that kind of a description?
So that's on a case by case basis. And I totally, fun fact, if I were stranded on a desert island and I could only eat one food for the rest of my life, it would be bread. It's my favorite thing.
Okay, you're a bread fan. Okay.
I'm one of those like hardcore bread fans. So it really depends on the person, because some people respond better to out of sight, out of mind. If I think I'm going to go overboard on this food, I'm not going to have it in the house. And other people will, with that type of restriction, will enter these binge and restrict cycles with it. So sometimes we don't know which type of person they are. So some people will do better if they say, I'm going to allow myself to have some cookies every day, or to have this whatever type of bread that I love every day. And then other people, so in the beginning, it's a matter of finding out, well, which how are they going to respond to it? Because there have been times when, you know, I've made recommendations in the past and I've made predictions in the past and they've been wrong, where something that I thought would work didn't. And then they would say, well, I want to not have this for a while. And I would say, like, where I thought, well, you know, just allow yourself to be around it. And they would say, like, no, I want to keep it out. And so we just have to kind of work with however well they know themselves and what what predictions they make, and relying a little bit on. So this is where coaching becomes so nuanced, is relying on our prior knowledge and their prior experience, meeting them where they're at, and then in some instances, allowing them to make those different types of decisions for themselves. So for you, we would have to really look at things holistically and say, are you in a cutting phase at the moment? Like, how deep is your deficit, or are you maintaining or bulking? And because that type of thing is going to change, we have to respect the fact that if you're in a deficit, you're going to be experiencing more cravings. You're going to be in a state where you are feeling a little bit more cognitively and physically stressed. And this can increase your cravings for these different types of food. So like I said, some people will do better by just taking them out entirely. And so for you, what we might do is when we're in kind of like a safe state where, let's say you're like, I wouldn't want to do this when you're in the middle of cutting for a show or something like that. But when you get to a place where you're maybe just maintaining, we would start to reintroduce that food and practice eating it mindfully, like really mindfully. And I have had people that when they start eating their trigger foods mindfully, they realize, oh, I didn't need an entire sleeve of cookies. I needed one or two. And I even had someone a couple of weeks ago who we worked on some mindful eating together. And she brought her favorite candy with her, the thing that she always goes overboard on. And she had one piece. And I said, how was it? And she goes, I don't think I actually like these. And I never realized they just weren't as good as I thought they would be. But she never realized that. And she would eat an entire container of this candy without paying attention to it. So the reason that she was just able to eat so easily, go overboard, is just she wasn't paying attention to it. So when we practice eating, with mindfulness, we realize that we actually don't need as much food as we think to, in order to get that sense of satisfaction. So a lot of the reasons that people worry about their trigger foods is, oh, because I'm going to need to eat the entire box or container or whatever it is. And I'm not going to be able to stop until I get to the end. But if we really practice that level of attention, turning up that level of attention, we don't need as much as we thought we did.
Yeah, and this is where I was just going to say the semantics of discipline actually can be applied, but you don't label it that. Like, I think when it comes to these behaviors or appreciating relationships around foods, it's, that very, like, it went to my mind where I recognize a good trigger food for me is peanut M&Ms, because they're so easy to eat, and it's, if I'm in front of TV, I'm just going to hammer them, and it's like I'm breathing them in. And to me, it's like, okay, well, like, respect that that's how you're going to behave around it. That's where you're at with that. And so B, to me, this is where my discipline, or practice is another term for discipline, really. You have to, like, appreciate that food. I always tell people it's okay to know a food is good for enjoyment. It's so okay. Like, it's a part of the great part about food is it's so good. And so appreciate what it can do for you. So instead of having that bowl of M&Ms in front of the TV, imagine how much more enjoyment you get. And that's the main source of enjoyment you're getting. If you're getting 2 wavelengths of Netflix and that, you're actually not even taking it in fully. But yeah,
I love that.
So I'm curious, is that a part of your practice that you ensure people don't allow themselves to watch TV and eat, or just try to minimize that? I mean, I personally haven't even, the only time is at the end of the night. It's part of my, it's literally part of my routine. But that is when it gets bad, is when it's binge watch Netflix and binge eat.
It's so easy, because it's so easy when you turn your brain off to just like finish a whole bag of chips or something.
All dopamine, it's awesome.
Because you mentioned discipline again, there is one thing that I want to add that I think will help you to really understand how I think about it. And that is, most people think about discipline as like some like drill sergeant type cracking the whip, like you have to do this or else. And it's coming from a place of needing to control, and it's threatening, it's punishment, and it's an external motivator. So it's saying, if you do not do this, then like there will be consequences. Like somebody's got to crack the whip because you're not being responsible for yourself. And the way that I think about self-discipline is teaching people that self-discipline can actually be an expression of self-love and self-care. And a lot of people don't really associate it with those kind of squishy, gooey terms. But if you really if you think about like how we take care of like, let's take ourselves out of it. How do we take care of pets or children that we love? Like, if you have a pet, you're not going to, you're not going to feed your dog chocolate just because they really enjoy it, because they're going to get sick. So we are monitoring and we're feeding them in ways that they are going to be healthy because we love them. Same thing with kids. Is kids would probably just ask for, like sugar all day, because why? It tastes really good and it's fun to eat. And so we don't want to say like, no, you can never have that. But we want to say, here are the foods that are the foundation of a healthy diet, and here's why we eat them, because I want you to go grow big and strong because I love you. And we can do the same thing with ourselves. It's not, you can never have this because you're so bad around it. But, we make these choices, we make these disciplined choices because we want ourselves to do well. We do it because we love ourselves, not because we hate ourselves. So in taking care of ourselves, because we love ourselves, we're going to exercise self-discipline. We're going to set boundaries with ourselves around some foods and say, hey, you know what? You would love that second serving of ice cream, but one was enough, and let's stop here. So
yeah, I like that self-discipline and self-love. That's a really important part of it. And the way you described it is why that language is so important, is that like trying to not be a drill sergeant, and a person can't be a drill sergeant to themselves. So I try to translate the word discipline from where it comes from, which is disciple, which is the follower of the way. And so what people need to find is their way, right? What is your way? Like, I might have my disciplines, my way, I might have my food rituals and all that stuff, but when it comes down to it, you got to find your way and be a disciplined follower of that way for yourself. And I think it's it's just interesting how the language really does play a part. That's why I was just curious. Now I have this is probably one of the biggest ones, because for me, if I were not to be as lucky as I am now, because I have a girlfriend I'm very in love with, so I have someone to spend time with, but I legitimately came to the conclusion that I was dating food. If you have, like, I was like right around when I turned 30, late 29, and my closer friends all had other things going on. One guy moved away, and then I was living with young friends, so I wasn't really hanging with them. My Friday and Saturday night was just, okay, Netflix, skip the dishes, let's have a good night. And it was almost like it was like a skip the dishes booty call, because then I got an emotional connection from it. And I would legitimately look forward to that. That was my ritual and motion, and obviously overeating, and especially if I smoked weed, the munchies. But it was like, it was an event, it was a thing. And, I work hard all week, I discipline throughout the week. But then that day, that's where I found my connection, my emotional connection. I even had a client who said, I when we were doing some programming stuff, she chose to do a ketogenic diet. Like, I never told her she had to. She chose it, but she was like, I miss food, my friend. So she was describing food as a friend. So I now feel so lucky that I have someone that I don't need to order in to have a nice Friday, Saturday night. I don't need that emotional connection, but I don't know who I'd be if I didn't. I now have a much better relationship with food. But I'm curious if you notice that this is a more challenging thing for individuals that are single, that don't have those emotional connections, that are trying to find some sort of, it's the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, something that gives them something to look forward to, that food actually fills for a lot of people.
I would say that the context changes, but people who are in relationships or have families at home have just experienced emotional eating just as much, but for different reasons. So rather than it being a sense of, well, I don't know if you were even experiencing loneliness, but it sounds like this was very much, it sounds fun. Like the way that you describe it, I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like a really good way to spend the night.
Oh yeah.
And it also depends on, well, how did you feel afterwards? Were you or anyone else that does this? were you feeling that guilt and regret and like self-loathing, or, you know, were you feeling negative emotions afterwards, or were you like, you know what, that was actually a really nice night, I'm glad I treated myself to that. So
Sorry, yeah,
yeah,
that's
so
actually a really good point. That I came over all, like, I still had this habit when I was in the first year I was dating my girl. I still had that habit around her, but
mhm.
I would say I drastically healed my relationship with food. And I think even the right foods, and appreciating how the right food changes your relationship with food, how you can feel after. And so I think that's a very valid point for sure.
Yeah, and like I said, is people who are in relationships, or it can be their partner can be a source of stress. Their can be a source of stress, and so and even, you know, for anyone, like work can be a source of stress. So it's not necessarily. So I would say that I don't see any fewer instances in people who are in relationships, or anything like that. But I did skip over one of your questions, which was in regards to mindful eating. Like, do I teach people like don't eat in front of the TV, stuff like that? Um, I don't explicitly. Depends on where they are in their journey. Where I will recommend that we have more meals that we are paying attention to than not, especially in the beginning. So there are also a lot of people who will tend to take their lunch break from work and just keep working and eating at the same time, instead of giving themselves like a proper break, paying attention to their food, and just getting that mental break from work. Or when we do take that break, we're scrolling on our phone or reading a book or listening to something. And it's not necessarily that we need to pay so much attention to our food, even though that is a good practice. In part, that is like we're not actually giving our brains a break that we need to during the day. But I would say for most people, even after we have built a healthy relationship with food, that having some meals in front of the TV is not going to cause us to backslide. But it does take some practice in the beginning to start paying attention to, when do I start to get full? Am I one of those people who uses my plate being empty as a cue to be finished? Or do I actually pay attention to my hunger signals and stop when I'm full? If I'm watching TV, do I forget to check in with myself? Because where I am at personally right now, I will have my first few meals of the day. I try to just eat. When it was during the summer, I would even just go outside with just food and feed my dog. I'd eat my own food. And then my last meal of the day would be in front of the TV. And what I kind of trained myself to do was I'm eating, I'm trying to eat more slowly, and I'm checking in with myself. Am I full yet? Am I full? Like, how full am I feeling? Because if we really pay attention during those meals, you'll notice that there is like a bite that you get to when you go, I'm not hungry anymore. If I continue eating, it's just going to be for pleasure, or out of habit, or because I don't leave food on my plate. So it's either going to be habit or pleasure. But so if we're really paying attention, there's always a bite that we get to. Or, you know, sometimes maybe if you're like training really hard or something like that, you might finish your plate and go, I'm still hungry. More often, if we're in the habit of overeating, there's going to be a bite that we get to when we go like, I'm full, but I'm going to finish this anyway, either because it's really good or because I was taught not to waste food or leave food on my plate, or, you know, like I said, you just use that as your cue for being finished. So it's another one of those gray areas where I would say depends on the person, depends on the context, but that I'm not super strict about every meal has to be like just you and your food.
Yeah, I like that. There's always going to be contextual questions that I ask, but the appreciation of being full, and that has been a huge evolution for me more recently. Is that I think that's just like, you know, when you've been through yo-yo dieting, you're actually never practicing the right, like you never practice the right level of satiety. You don't even know what a maintenance is. So like that's legitimately like that's the biggest thing for people to search for. Do you ever encourage people, and I like, because you're talking about slow eating, and because I am a wolfer, you know, like you put me in front of food and it's like, where'd it go? Like, did someone come eat it? But no, it's like, you just, oh shit, I need to come up for air once in a while. So I'm getting better, but I have to be very mindful of it. It's one of those, it's part of that mindful practice. And I've heard of coaches or some people like telling people, try to count how many bites you have, how many bites of food, or how much you chew your food. I haven't done that. I haven't recommend people do that, but to just the whole cognitive practice is one thing. But have you ever implemented anything like that, or do you just kind of say, hey, just try to be really mindful when you're eating?
I haven't used that specifically. I can see why people would, but I don't necessarily think I would recommend it personally. But the way that I help people to practice more mindful eating is by giving them things to pay attention to. So the two primary things that we can pay attention to when we're eating mindfully are the sensual inputs. So sensual as in like your five senses. How does it smell? How does it taste? How does it feel? And how does it feel could be, what is the texture of the food? What is the temperature of the food? All kinds of different questions about like the actual experience in your mouth. And I know a lot of people have just things with food textures. How does it look? And then the other part of this is not just taking in as much as we can with our senses and noticing what's the temperature, what's the texture, what are all the different flavors that I can detect, but then our cognitive experience. So how hungry, like thinking, how hungry am I? How much am I anticipating this next bite? Because usually when we're wolfers, which like full disclosure, I'm still practicing eating slower. I'm a very fast eater. When I'm not paying attention is, when do you load up that next bite? How much do you anticipate it? How much did you enjoy the first one? How hungry are you? What are you thinking about this food? Are you thinking like, wow, this is really good, I want to have this again? Or like, oh, this didn't turn out as well as I wanted it to. Or, oh, I should have sat down sooner because now it's starting to get cold. Or are you just, are you thinking about the day that you had, or what you're doing next, or this was a pain in the ass to make, or whatever it is that you're watching or distracting yourself with? Like, what is that cognitive experience? When people do a full eating meditation, they'll teach you to get a lot deeper with it. And I by no means do this with every meal, but you can think about things like, where did this food come from? How many people contributed to getting this food on my plate? From the farmers that grew the different ingredients to the people who drove the trucks, the grocery store workers. Like, how many people were involved in this line? Like, where did this food come from? How was it made? All of these different questions that we can ask about a single piece of food that's on our plate. But like I said, if for just like kind of normal everyday eating, we can really just pay attention to these sensory experiences that we're having and what we're thinking about the food, or what we're thinking about as we're eating it.
Yeah, I like that. Just trying to create awareness any way that you can be present with that food, think about where it came from. I've heard of people who talk about when they hunt and it's their animal that they killed. It creates such value and appreciation. It's like, people don't realize the hunter really values that experience and that animal sacrificing its life, and it becomes so much more attached, right? And it's a bit of a different relationship, and so I really like that. I've already taken a lot of your time, and I actually want to save a few more questions for the podcast, but I'm curious.
Cool. Okay.
If people can reach out to you because you got some great resources. I was curious if you had any other books or any other kind of influences around how you became to understand emotional eating that you could guide myself or anyone else to?
No.
No.
I actually, I'm trying to think about what resources I've used to put this all together, and I would probably have to give you a list of like 50 books.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, that's a really good question. Because the Jawbreaker model just kind of came to me one day. So I can't tell you like, well, it was based on this, and that. It was really just like having years of experience of taking this stuff in, learning about different modes of therapy. So about how we think influences how we feel. So cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, even some things from like, I'll listen to life coaching podcasts, and just because they have a different kind of take on things. But they also work with changing behaviors, different types of theories of motivation. So self-determination theory. And yeah, it's just it's a lot of, and then tons and tons of mindfulness. I've had a mindfulness practice for probably 6 or 7 years now. So I've done eating meditations, and now I will do guided eating meditations with people, and also things, related things like body image. So yeah, I wish it was more condensed, or I wish there was somewhere that I could like easily recommend to send people to think about this in kind of like an organized way. But I don't have anything coming to mind.
No, that goes to show your work, right? It goes to show that I've seen that before, where it's like, if someone asked me where my influence is the same idea. Like I have some books I give people more so for mindset, like a lot of mindset, a lot of self-help books, and there's a handful that I think were more impactful for me. But at the same time, just like with your vast experience, that goes to show the true work that you put into it. So what's your kind of education? Is it all just more from that, or did you do any post-secondary education in this realm?
Not in psychology specifically. I have, it actually started out with just a lot of self-help and personal development books, and books about psychology, books about neuroscience. And I was like, this stuff is really interesting to me. And so from there, I started reading more journal articles, studies, books that were written for therapists and psychologists and coaches. And I started actually looking into things from a more like professional, more scientific angle, as opposed to the kind of like pop science books. So that was kind of where that took off. And then literally surrounding myself with different types of coaches. So the coaches that are on the Ritual Coaching Collective team alongside me are, we have one therapist, and we have a behavioral therapist who's also a mindfulness practitioner. We have another therapist who is currently working on her master's degree. And so I'm like consistently asking for input and making sure that it's sort of how I have achieved this level of supervision on my work that you would get in a master's program.
Yeah. I think having that level of in-depth investigation to it, because it's also like, and this is just my view of it, it's the last 20, 30 years problem, right? Like this is new research, and because people don't realize 20 years of research isn't a lot. So when we're getting into this hyperpalatability state, we're getting into the most lethargic society ever. So to get into, like, people probably aren't even aware they're emotionally eating. Most aren't, right? And so you're got to be on the forefront of this stuff. So I think that's great. I really appreciate you coming on here. I'm going to make sure
thanks for the invite.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I'm going to have you, I'll reach out to have you on my podcast, and I'll pick apart a few more questions. I just love this chat because I love the viewpoints you have, and I'm curious about some of the other, where we might differ. I'm actually really fascinated with where your approach might be different than mine, because I want to be open to other perspectives, especially when you get into the nuanced details of food types and stuff like that. But no, this has been great. I think it'll be very helpful for all my clients and all the viewers today. So thank you so much, Alicia. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you. And like I said, I feel like we could have a 3-hour conversation and still not be done. So I have to stop somewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'll let you enjoy the rest of your Friday here. And thank you again.
You too.
See ya.